Welcome again, ladies and gentlemen. And our next session is going to be our presenter is going to be Matthew Lambert, and definitely latching on to our previous presentation and tying in very well how to embrace an increasingly dynamic pricing environment. Thanks, Matthew.
Morning, everyone. Let's see if I have better luck with the clicker. Hurrah. Cool, so for those of you that don't know me, Matthew Lambert, Senior Director in WW's Insurance Consulting and Technology Practice, pricing actuary by sort of background, and I've been supporting South African clients adopt our WW software for the last 7 or so years. And what I'm going to speak to you about today is a bit of a reflection on how the pricing environment is changing and what that means for pricing teams and for the capabilities within those pricing teams, as well as the skill sets that you need to maintain a cutting edge. So let's start off with what do I mean by a changing pricing environment. And there's quite a lot going on. I mean, guessing most of you in here today are working in pricing as practitioners, so a lot of these are going to be very familiar to you and very much front of your sort of day-to-day lives. But just to bring a few of these that I sort of see as most pertinent to life, we've got changing buyer behaviour in South Africa. We've got increasing focus around direct, increasing and new entrants into the market, very much focused on how they can create a digital-first sort of pricing and underwriting journey for customers. And that all drives sort of pricing demand and sort of price sensitivity to a sort of to new levels. So on the one hand, we've got that sort of increased sensitivity to price. On the other hand, we've got a number of trends looking at more uncertainty around our cost of insurance, whether that be macroeconomic trends, either locally or internationally, creating uncertainty around cost inflation from either tariffs, from supply chain disruption, or whether that be through climate change creating volatility in Nat Cat. And I think the market's had a good couple of years. I'll touch wood on your behalf around that, but there is a sense that over the next 5 to 10 years there will become increasing volatility around that Nat Cat exposure. Outside of natural catastrophe, there's also a very dynamic risk environment. More broadly, you've got cyber risks becoming more and more of a worry. Certainly a lot of the sort of international specialty markets are very concerned about what a cyber catastrophe loss and sort of event could look like for the industry. But you also have other aspects of emerging risk, whether that be through intangibles, whether that be through microinsurance, whether that be through changes to the vehicle parking lot through EVs and sort of ADAS features that are sort of changing the nature of how of the repair network and how that sort of repair and how claims can evolve. Away from things that are maybe happening outside of your control and more inside your pricing function, we've seen pricing teams as they sort of respond to this, sort of grow over the last 5 to 10 years, and then start to bump into, well, what's the sort of scarcity of resource and bringing together different skill sets. And Anna's talk spoke a little bit about the bringing together of data science capabilities alongside sort of classic actuarial sort of capabilities, and that's again something that you've got to bump through and sort of work out what works well for you. And look, it wouldn't be a conference talk in 2025 if I didn't mention artificial intelligence and the potential that has to disrupt our underlying processes, the capabilities within pricing functions, and also within the broader world. So there's a lot going on, but probably the biggest thing that's changing is all of you guys. One of the things that I think makes pricing a really exciting field to work in is that as each of you develop capabilities to address some of these things, you raise the bar for everyone else. And then everyone else finds a new way of tackling a problem, and the bar raises again. So I'm going to spend a couple of minutes just to reflect on how I've seen that sort of maturing of capability within pricing over the last 5 years. So going to do that with a simple sort of pricing maturity framework. So across the top, where's my screens? Across the top, we've got sort of key areas within a pricing function, key things that pricing functions are responsible for delivering. And then as we come down the slide, we've got at the top, we've got the sort of the base capabilities. And then we've got this bit in the middle, which I'm sort of referring to as offline pricing, where offline pricing. And then the bottom is the sort of most advanced capabilities where we're sort of calling sophisticated pricing. And if I rewind the clock to 2020, not a great period in the deep and dark part of COVID. We won't need to dwell on that piece too much. But in terms of pricing capabilities in the South African market, I'd characterise it very much as GLM's well embedded within the market. Everybody building those on sort of 2 yearly, 3 yearly, maybe 1 yearly if you're particularly on it as sort of a cycle, but in a relatively disconnected sort of pricing process. So as Anna mentioned earlier, the sort of implementation still very much done within PASs, and sort of a lot of the data pipelining being done sort of ad hoc and monitoring very much focused on how do I keep track of my AVE. So that's sort of 5 years ago. If I fast forward to 2025 and the blue-green colour sort of indicates the new capabilities and the focus of capability between 2020 and 25, there's been a huge focus and shift towards externalised rating, and that's allowed pricing teams to develop more complex rating structures. So the incorporation of peril level rating, so getting more granular in how those prices are being built up, looking at things, being able to build up from the ground up, frequency, severity at a really granular level, able to bring in a sort of lifetime value component, certainly in the personal line space, and sort of bringing in conversion, retention, and starting the journey around optimization, typically in the sort of renewal space where it's slightly easier to sort of get a grip and get on top of that. So that's where we've got to in 2025, and a lot of that is build a huge amount of foundational capability. And so when I step forward, I'm actually only going to step forward 3 years, because I think there'll be the same amount of change in the next 3 years that we've experienced in the previous 5 years. So to sort of spoiler alert of the rest of the talk, the two sort of key areas that I sort of see as being focus of capability over the next 3 years, on the one half, on this right-hand side, we have a sort of capability move towards machine learning, move towards having a modelling framework that is more of a modelling hub. And so much more mature data pipelines coming in, a capability to build models at a much greater scale where you can compare different model forms, understand the differences between them, and drive insight into that. I think there'll be the start of moving towards even sort of more advanced analytical sort of capabilities, sort of incorporating text analytics and deep learning, possibly outside of the direct sort of rating structure, but sort of more broadly informing your pricing capabilities. And at the other half, big focus towards monitoring, as sort of Anna's previous talk spoke about that being a really one of the key ways that you can drive sophistication without embedding more complexity into your rating algorithm. So what's that going to mean for your pricing teams? So let's start with the skills within the team. So this is our sort of skills matrix, and a lot of the skills and capabilities, skills within pricing functions at the moment, we see are typically focused or historically been very much focused around that predictive analytics piece and sort of a bit of pricing delivery. So, pricing actuaries, building models. There's some data stuff. A lot of you will be sick to death of data, but it's often done as a sort of a side of desk data capability, and most people's main sort of reason to be is about predictive analytics, and then how do I get that deployed into a system. What we see is as you look to enable the sort of and be in a pricing team that's able to respond and react to the sort of external environment, is that there's a need to sort of broaden that skill set and a need to create more specialization within, sort of respect more specialization within your team. And I'll pull out two sort of key trends from within this. So the first is sort of the collaboration between a pricing function and a technology or IT department. So, and there's two halves to that. So on the one is data. Data is sort of the lifeblood of a pricing function. And I think there's a really interesting dynamic of how much data capability a pricing team has. I was, only this week, actually, I was talking to head of pricing of a South African insurer, and they were reflecting that about a third of their pricing resource were actually data experts. And so I think that sort of speaks to the quantum, and I think respecting that data expertise is its own discipline, and data engineering as a sort of capability to create robust, repeatable data pipelines is something that is really, really valuable. And on the other hand, the other half, where you've got sort of close IT collaboration, is through that deployment pillar, where you've got to make decisions of how do you create agility in your deployment processes whilst respecting a need to keep the core platforms supported and live and sort of embedded within a sort of a broader process. And so what we see is with pricing functions, they start to work out which of those capabilities do they need to bring in-house within the pricing function, and where do they want to have control, and which bits do they want to say, this isn't actually my role, I'm a customer, and I'm going to be a very demanding customer to the rest of my business. The second theme of skills that I'm really passionate about actually is the sort of portfolio management capability. So the sort of the paler pink. And most of you, I think, would go, yeah, we do portfolio management, we do look at some of those. Yes, we do a gap to plan. Yes, we help with business plan. But for me, reflecting and acknowledging that the sort of portfolio management skill set, the ability to have people in your team that can collaborate across functions, can bring insights across from corporate actuarial, can engage with product teams, with underwriting teams to synthesize the predictive analytics and understand, well, what's going to be the commercial impact of these decisions, and how am I going to steer and react and get ahead of those external trends, is a really important and very powerful skill set, and something that we often see as being done as a sort of side of desk sort of capability, rather than being a core focus of the team. So that's skills, and as I sort of said, sort of reflecting on those sort of different skill sets and respecting the specialization, you then get into a bit of a challenge of, well, how do I organize? I'm no longer having one person that's doing three skill sets. I've got three people with different skills. So, and I'm not going to spend too long on this, but I think it's just a nod to the fact that how you organize your teams is something that sort of can be that just needs a bit of thought, needs to be thought through, and sort of put up the two extremes of sort of organizational model within a pricing team around being product centric, where the teams are all aligned to a product. So that could be, I have my direct motor team, and within that team they have all of the skill sets that they need, as opposed to a skill centric group where you might say, look, this is my risk modeling team, they build the risk models across all of my products, but then and with each of these models, and hybrids of them exist as well. There's a spectrum, have disadvantages, and the key thing I just wanted to say is be mindful of the disadvantages, reflect on what the outcomes you're trying to drive as a pricing function, and also acknowledge the culture within your organisation, because different organisations, the cultures of them are better suited at sort of mitigating some of those disadvantages. That's sort of a brief aside. What I'm going to do is I'm going to drill down now, sort of introduce some of those skills, and we've sort of introduced sort of evolving those sort of capabilities and the sort of key capabilities of model monitoring or performance monitoring and improving the sort of modelling process. And we're going to sort of bring that to life and look at those processes. And we're going to have a slightly simplified pricing team with these 5 different personas, where a sort of data wrangler, which is sort of a very emotional sort of phrase, but feels somehow very apt, is sort of reflecting the sort of side of desk data work that a lot of you will recognise, as opposed to a data engineer that is more of a data expert that's focused on productionising data processes, pricing domain expertise. I think that's sort of and pricing modeler, sort of the pricing actuary core capability, and then data scientist. So we're going to look at a couple of those sort of 2 key processes and how the sort of resourcing and the sort of skills and capabilities might change that dynamic. So first of all, the portfolio management one, and in this we're going to keep the headcount roughly the same, so six FTE. But if we sort of think about where we are at the moment or in recent history, a lot of the focus around that portfolio management process has been on churning out the MI itself. How do I get that MI, rekeying, making ad hoc changes, fixing broken data pipelines. A lot of the effort is on getting that initial production run done and then the sort of MI interpretation is quite a manual process. PDF packs this thick where you're flicking through it to try and find the trend, or you're going into pricing committee and you've got a PowerPoint that's God knows how thick and you're trying to figure out what you're going to do with it. But then ultimately you then get to a rate selection, so you might tweak prices, make a segmental change, and you get the deployment over the line. Where we would see that moving to, and sort of the sort of capabilities that we're seeing being adopted, is that at MI production you can reduce the amount of effort that's needed in there by having more of a dedicated, more of a focused capability that's productionizing those data pipelines. The MI interpretation is becoming much more analytically driven, so we've got a data science capability that's sitting on top of that, where you're using machine learning techniques. This is something that we talk to clients about in terms of sort of segmental trawling, where you use machine learning algorithms to look across a set of KPIs to pull out segments of interest. So, for example, pulling out, okay, well, we've seen a spike in conversion for Johannesburg under 30-year-olds driving Chinese-make vehicles. So, what does that mean? How do I go and investigate that? Am I pricing that segment appropriately? And that creates the capacity for you to then start to do active portfolio management, to start to be thinking about those trends we introduced at the very start of this talk, to be thinking about, well, how is that going to be impacting my business? How am I going to be, what is my response to climate change going to be? How is my accumulation coming through into this data? What's going to happen? And so you can be on top of that, be ahead of the curve on some of those pieces. The second process I'm going to talk through is this sort of model update process. So this is where a huge amount of resources is spent. And again, you can see at the moment a lot of that focuses on data, and a lot of the resources focused around the data and the model fitting. And here we see that there's an opportunity to reduce the amount of capacity spent on this process, where by creating those data pipelines again, you can improve things, and by deploying machine learning techniques, you can make much more efficient use of you can get model fitting capability process done much more quickly. I think a really important piece, and this is sort of reinforcing again a point that Anna made earlier, is that pricing domain expert, that red figure, that's not the space to compromise on that model fitting. We still see that as really, really powerful capability and skill to have in that space. And what do you do with that extra capacity? That's what you then get to free up for that pricing and research and innovation processes. And this could be covering a huge range of things. It could be investigating brand new sort of predictive analytic capability, but it could be looking at external data. What vehicle data have we got that we can bring in? How does that help me understand what my exposures are? How can I bring in geographical data, flood maps, et cetera, et cetera? So there's a really broad range of things, and to stay on top of that dynamic environment, it actually takes much more capacity and headspace to be able to be doing some of those things. So I've spoken a lot about skills. A quick sidestep onto, so we've spoken about skills, spoken about process. A quick comment around the sort of technology that sort of we see as being needed to enable this. And because I think without that technology enabler, you just can't create that level of, you can't create the step change in improvement. And for us, this comes down to having an integrated pricing environment. So the red boxes here represent the sort of core pricing platforms that needs to go all the way through from data pipelines through to live deployment. And we see that monitoring capability as being a sort of a core underpinning of that sits adjacent to all of the predictive modeling, so all of that analytics, all of the ability to develop rating structures that support both the underwriting and the pricing pieces, all of your optimization, so the monitoring capability sitting alongside that, keeping on top of the changes to that are going on into that. So I mean, that's something just to have in the back of your mind of how do you delivering the sort of efficiencies that's spoken about without having the right technology in place is something that can be very, very challenging. Okay, I can see a timer slowly ticking down at me, so I will move on. And I think just to sort of conclude, bring together a few of those themes, I guess. So, number one, I sort of think about as we think about the move from capabilities in 2025 to 2028. My reflection is that the arms race is, in terms of capability, is going to move on from the externalization of rates. Most of you are either in flight or have done that, and it will move on to this automated monitoring and machine learning capability. And those that are able to adopt that sooner are going to be the ones that can run a more effective pricing team, more effective pricing processes that gives you more time to be innovating and maintaining your cutting edge, and ultimately enabling you to anticipate the next set of changes in the market and react to the market changes that we sort of introduced at the top of the talk. So that concludes the presentation. Open up for questions. Don't be shy. Something I never thought I'd say to a South African audience.
There we go. Thank you. Maybe if you had to look at current, I mean, I think you've spoken about putting more emphasis on the data and the different skills, but if your view from what are the skills that a pricing actuary needs to learn today, I guess, to remain relevant? I think my concern is as you get more, we sometimes tend to hand stuff off to data scientists and we're like, oh, it's fine, but your view, what skill do we need to learn to stay relevant?
I think that pricing actuary one pricing actuary and another pricing actuary, the skills that they have is going to become more divergent over time. I think that pricing actuary will become much more of an umbrella term than it was historically. So you'll have some pricing actuaries that are very focused on predictive analytics and could probably call themselves an actuarial data scientist or whatever. It sort of becomes a bit moot whether they're a data scientist or an actuary. And you have other pricing actuaries who are much more focused on engaging with corporate actuarial, with underwriting, to provide the sort of the sort of insight to the business of that this is what we're seeing, these are what the predictive models are saying, this is how we think we should respond and react, and how we should embed that within the team. So I think that it's a really exciting. It's something that that's something that we should embrace as a sort of actuarial community of, the sort of the thing that there's a much more diverse set of tasks and of places where we can embed our value. And I think that we should try and acknowledge that some pricing actuaries are going to be more drawn in one direction and others will be more drawn in the other, and we just shouldn't try and keep everybody doing everything.
Cool. Thank you very much. What are your thoughts on the role of generative AI and like agents within the pricing space?
Yeah, so I think AI has a huge potential, right? And I think for me, there's different. It will show up in different market segments slightly differently. So if I focus for a second on personal lines, I guess. So for me, in the personal lines world, how I see that evolving is going to be more in the sort of model, the sort of portfolio management and sort of model monitoring capability, where you're going to want to be able to interrogate your portfolio using sort of text prompts. So you get a question, and that will be you get a question from an exec. Oh, what's going on? What's this question? Rather than an analyst going away and trying to pull together a load of stuff, it will start to become more actually self-serve to the executive, type it in. It provides some analysis on its own, and that's something that we're very much, we are actively exploring and building into our technology as how we can embed that and how we can make that sort of process more sort of interactive and less rigid. Because when you build sort of portfolio management dashboards and MI capability at the moment, a lot of it becomes a sort of, yes, you can slice and dice and pick a different factor, but the nature of the exhibits are quite fixed. Whereas you sort of see that sort of generative AI capability allows you to start to develop those. I think, thinking of a world where you might have an agentic pricing actuary that's in the background generating models and delivering it, I think is still a way away. Embedding the context into those agents to allow them to do that is very challenging. And at the moment, I don't think the regulatory and I don't think the governance of our sort of industry is ready for that sort of capability. I think instead you'll have agents which are running the models that pricing actuaries and pricing communities have developed to try and find out, try and surf through that MI and to sort of try and pull together some insight. So at the moment I tend to think of agentic capability as a bit like if you went away and hired 500 new graduates, what would you get them to do? So they might be able to, you've got to be able to have the time to train them, to coach them, to get them being productive, and so it's still a way away from being a productionized capability.
You showed us a slide with two possible ways of organizing a pricing function, one by product and the other by, suppose, functional area, with each functional area working on each product. What would you say is the better approach if you're building out a pricing function? Is it dependent on the size of the organization? If it is, would you have to move to the other one at some point?
Yeah. So I think I'm going to be very frustrating and stay on the fence, I think. So I've seen very successful pricing functions with both of those models. So I don't think you can say that one is better or a silver bullet to success. I think that you, depending on the size of your team, you can potentially, and sort of a level of alignment between your products, you potentially is one of the key things to think about. So if you're a personal lines insurer and you write motor and you write home, having some product-centric, and those are your only two products, or composite of those two, you can very relatively easily have a product-by-product view of that, and you're probably still going to have enough critical mass. Whereas if you're writing 30 different products, you potentially need to think about something else. So maybe size of organisation and complexity of organisation does start to play into it, but what you typically find is that if you're a company that only writes two products, you then get into, but I have a broker channel and I have a direct channel, and so you're instantly at 4. And then in South Africa, you've also then got I've got the monoline, I've got the standalone products, but then I also have my composite product, and so I want some oversight into that as well. So even in South Africa, even when you think about the simpler sort of product insurers, there's still quite a lot of moving pieces in there.
We have reached the end of our session. I must thank you all very much for your questions from the floor. Matthew, also thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
Just a note, there have been some changes to the program over the next sort of 2 hours. Your refreshment break, which starts now, will only end at 20 past 10. That means there's also been a change to the plenary. That will now start at 20 past 10 until 11:45. We've also extended the lunch break as a result of the changes. Lunch will now be from 11:45 until 10 past 1. Those changes are also available on the app as well. So please be aware of those changes. So please enjoy the next part of the program, which is the refreshment break. It's brought to you by IACA Consulting Actuaries. You can find them in the exhibition hall. You can also go watch the top 2 players fighting it out for the title for the Insight 2025 Chess Championship. You can also find them in the building earlier on. And then we'll see you back at 20 past 10 in the plenary session.